On August 15, the president of Afghanistan fled the country and power passed into the hands of the Taliban movement, which is banned in Russia, and the latter circumstance, by law, must be indicated whenever the Taliban is mentioned in the press. True, at the same time, delegates of this movement come to Moscow and meet with the leadership. The logic is, of course, strange, but if the question is what's going on in this Afghanistan anyway? If you are still worried, then the next 10 minutes will help you understand the situation. Afghanistan is the territory connecting India and the whole of Southeast Asia with the Middle East, and therefore with Africa and Europe. Moreover, in fact, this entire corridor is continuous mountains, and mountains with rare valleys between them. The mountain itself is not a sentence. Even a very decent number of mountains did not prevent, for example, Switzerland and Japan from creating very developed and successful civilizations, supplementing them with alpine skiing or the tradition of admiring the snow on top of Fuji. But the fact is that the Alps and Japanese mountains are themselves covered with fertile soils all over the place, and are surrounded by beautiful, fertile flatland rich in streams, rivers, and lakes. While the mountains in Afghanistan are mostly rocks, nothing but stone, these mountains stand on the clayey fringe of the Karakum Desert. As a result, only a very small number of people could fully feed themselves in this vast territory, which greatly influenced the local history. As a result of the peculiarities of the climate and terrain, a full-fledged state did not develop in Afghanistan and did not even have its own people. The coveted key to the east and west was constantly under the rule of one empire or another. The conquests of Afghanistan were carried out in turn by the Indians, the Greeks led by Macedonian, Persians, Arabs, Turks, Mongols, Great Britain, the Soviet Union. It's impossible to list them all. Conquests consisted of a palace or fort being built on some piece of relatively flat terrain, and a couple of main roads began to be more or less controlled, but overall nothing much changed. It is very difficult to build a state when it takes 2 weeks to go from a miserable village to a neighboring one, despite the fact that, sitting in the first village, you can easily chat with the resident of the second and even throw a bag of dried apricots over the impassable chasm separating you. Afghanistan was inhabited by those tribes that fled from conquerors or evil neighbors. It was the end of the earth, a place of escape into the sky. Here you could hide in a mountain cave and, at the very least, live on dried apricots. A somewhat similar situation developed in the Caucasus, but life there in general was more satisfying and joyful. Therefore, the population of Afghanistan is a great variety of languages and nationalities, not to say that they have too warm feelings for each other. There are many Hazaras, Uzbeks, and Tajiks here, but the largest national conglomerate here is the Pashtuns. Pashtuns are like Persians, but very heterogeneous. All of Asia is mixed there. From Cambodia to Arabia there is not a single people who would not have contributed a significant drop of blood to the creation of the Pashtun ethnic group. The people as a whole are very beautiful. Blue-eyed blondes and green-eyed redheads are not uncommon among Pashtuns. All types of appearance are represented here. Nevertheless, the Pashtuns consider themselves a single people. Moreover, they are completely obsessed with the purity of their nation. The Pashtun Wale code directly prohibits them from mixing with other peoples. Most of the tribes that flocked to Afghanistan for several thousand years were engaged in robbery in one way or another. This was the only natural and stable fishery here. The Great Silk Road passed through the Afghan city of Balkh, and it was the nomads, the Pashtun cattle breeders, who became the main ones in gutting the merchants. In the most peaceful times, they imposed taxes on merchants and obliged them to hire their warriors to accompany them. Well, in freer times, rent was removed in a more natural way by ripping open bales and bellies during rapid raids. The Pashtun Wale code mentioned above is the code of a robber people. Pashtuns revere him above the rules of Sharia. After all, in fact, they accepted Islam quite late, in the 13th to 14th centuries, before which they more often adhered to Zoroastrianism. In the first place there are honor and courage, fierce contempt for death, blood feud as a substitute for any courts, hospitality and the right of refuge even for the worst enemies, impatience with any ridicule, humor, effeminacy, cowardice, and caution. A man is a warrior and only a warrior, a woman is considered exclusively as a tool for creating new warriors, therefore her rights are insignificant, but protecting their women from other people's views, words, and rumors is the primary task of the tribe. In many ways, the Pashtun Wailat is much tougher and uncompromising than Islamic rules. The Court of Elders, when solving tribal problems, prefers to use it in controversial moments. Let's add to this that the Taliban, banned in Russia, is a purely Pashtun organization. Adhering to the norms of Pashtun Wailat. Despite all his declared pro-Arabism, Afghanistan itself has never been needed for nothing. We needed a road through these stones. First for camels, then for oil tanks, then for pipelines. And now, of course, for opium. Afghanistan produces a lot of opium, more than 90% of the world's supply. It's a so-so deposit, to put it bluntly. No matter what the Taliban may say with a benevolent and religious face, opium under its control was grown and sold regularly, poppy crops decreased only once. After all, this is a lot of money, ending up in the hands of a very small number of people, for which many are ready to fight and die. Everything is very logical. The Taliban, of course, is a heterogeneous movement, there are more radical trends, and there are less radical ones. But in general, it remains, in fact, a criminal group that has devoted its entire life to war, and it is very difficult for such structures to do without drug smuggling in a country that produces nothing but these same drugs. Since the Taliban came to power, production has grown rapidly, and only in 1999, 2001, having achieved concessions from the international community, the Taliban immediately banned poppy cultivation, reducing plantings by 80% in just one dry year. True, this had almost no effect on exports, stocks were sold from warehouses at an increased price. And a little later, with the start of the U.S. counterterrorism operation in Afghanistan in October 2001 and the subsequent fall of the Taliban regime, this country again came out on top in heroin production. However, if in the 90s the main markets for Afghan heroin were Russia and European countries, then after the start of the invasion a significant part of the export was redirected towards the United States. However, there is a third side to this story, domestic consumption, because every fifth Afghan is a drug addict. In every city there are places where drug addicts gather in large numbers, they dig in landfills with hollowed-out caves, under bridges, and all these places look very scary. Pashtuns in Afghanistan will certainly support the Taliban, because this is their movement, which completely suits the traditional Pashtun mentality. Pashtuns in Afghanistan make up half of the population. Almost all other nationalities are against the Taliban, but they are divided and weak. The most important thing to understand about Afghanistan is that there has been a civil war here for the last 100 years, no matter what external forces are involved in it. So maybe we should just leave Afghanistan to its own devices? Well, this is a so-so solution. The first to explode is Pakistan, where many Pashtuns live, then the explosion machines will go all over the world. After all, the ranks of the Taliban still include representatives of other terrorist organizations such as Al-Qaeda, the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, or ISIS, and all of them are not at all against external aggression. Money from opium will swirl in this deadly whirlwind, because the code of Pashtunwala does not imply a life in peace, tranquility, and pious cultivation of dried apricots. In Afghanistan, it is pointless to fight for women's rights. The essence of Pashtunwala is the endless reproduction of boys who kill and die. A woman should be focused solely on childbirth, girls have no need to read and write, and all a boy is required to do is know how to handle a saber or a grenade launcher. Poppy seeds will be grown by quiet Tajiks, and another economy is not needed here. Yes, among the Pashtuns there are people who dream of a quiet life among books, fountains, educated wives, and blooming gardens. There are very few of them, and their voices are heard only when the Taliban or another tribal organization needs to seduce the stupid Western barbarians for the next handouts and preferences. But often even these people simply lie. Afghanistan has a population of 35 million, most of whom live in poverty and regular hunger. Pashtuns live better than others. All attempts to establish a sane government in Afghanistan that obeys at least some international rules will be successful only as long as the palace of this government is surrounded by a powerful modern army. The Pashtuns are a union of tribes. The main issues there are decided by the elders of these tribes in council. No matter from which tribe you appoint an emir, sultan, or president, this will be a challenge to all other tribes who have practiced the art of blood feud and effective death for centuries. 15 years ago in 2006, armed with old Soviet maps, the USGS began a series of aerial surveys of Afghanistan's mineral resources using state-of-the-art gravimetric and magnetic measuring equipment attached to an old Navy Orion P-3 aircraft. In this way, about 70% of the territory of Afghanistan was surveyed. This was the most comprehensive geological survey of Afghanistan ever undertaken. The data was stunning. American geologists working with the Pentagon team also conducted on-the-ground research in the area of dry salt lakes in western Afghanistan. There, in one place in the province of Ghazni, large reserves of lithium were discovered. But this, one might say, is the lifeblood of all electric cars, or rather their batteries, which seem to be becoming our near future. Only at the first estimate did lithium reserves exceed those of the metal in Bolivia, which is currently considered to have the largest known lithium deposits in the world. Then the Pentagon called Afghanistan Lithium Saudi Arabia. Also found in Afghanistan are gold, copper, cobalt, iron, barite, neodymium, sulfur, lead, silver, zinc, niobium and 1.4 million metric tons of rare earth elements. Approximate dollar estimates of all this wealth range from 1 to 3 trillion. But who will get this Afghan treasury? Let's take a look. Even under the previous government of Afghanistan, which fled, China received rights to explore and subsequently develop mineral deposits, including lithium and copper. But the power in Afghanistan has changed, but China's position has not changed at all, and may even have strengthened. China, farsightedly, did not place its main bet on the previous authorities of Kabul, and conducted a dialogue, including with the group that has now taken power. For China, the main thing is the implementation of its strategy. And one of the parts of this strategy is the One Belt, One Road initiative. As part of this initiative, there is a project to build a railway from China, through Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, to Iran and Iraq. This road passes through an area where there are deposits of lithium and other resources. Well, then let the viewer put together the puzzle himself. President Biden, withdrawing the last troops from Afghanistan under fire from the Taliban, said that the American people are tired of fighting on foreign soil. At the moment, a considerable part of the Afghans are trying by hook or by crook to flee the country, border guards are crossing the border in garrisons, the non-Pashtun population is terrified, the world community is expressing concern with all its might and asking the Taliban not to kill their opponents too painfully, otherwise this is possible to be subject to cuts in humanitarian aid. It's not good. This is what it is like now, Afghanistan. And what it will be like in the near future is easy to guess. See you on our channel.